Enjoy our videos and podcasts and would like us to continue putting out regular quality content, head over to patreon.com/aircrewinterview where you can donate monthly, and in return you will get rewards ranging from early interview viewings, bonus clips, credited as a producer, and much more. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, Mike. What do most pilots' aircrew stub their toes on? Well, the memorable thing for me in the Navy was banging my shin on what's called a knee knocker. I don't know what the hole that separates the frames in the ship, and I've still got some scars on my shins from taking massive layers off. In the airplane, I don't know. You bang your knee occasionally, or your elbow on the unforgiving side, the metal of the airplane. Let's see. And Mike, again, you watched a short film about the F-5 aggressors. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, that was great. So that was what we called a sizzle reel. That's the thing that we put out to, I don't know. Mike, can you still see me there?
Yeah, I've just switched off my video, so there's no interruptions, mate.
Anyway, so the last of the dogfighters was our sizzle reel that we used to go out and raise money to film the full feature, Speedin Angels. But yeah, it's actually one of my favorite segments as well. Toughest thing you faced in initial training? That's a great question, Mission Goer 1. I think probably the very toughest thing that I faced was just the sense of belief that I could actually do it. I had never flown a plane before, so my first 3, 4, 5 flights in the T-34 were really daunting, and I didn't do all that great. And then all of a sudden, something clicked about my 7th flight, and I can't remember if it was a different instructor because I had the same instructor for the first few, but all of a sudden my landings were great, and or at least acceptable. I don't know about great, but I felt from that moment on, I felt like I can do this, and it really it felt very natural for me moving forward. Obviously, landing on the aircraft carrier was a huge a test and something that I wasn't positive I could do, but I always had this mentality like, there are better pilots than me and there are worse pilots than me. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not the best or the worst, so if they can do it, I can do it. And whatever mental trick you need or use to get you through, that's what you hang your hat on. Marcel, thank you. Good to be back. Let's see. F5 is a great jet from John Ellis. It is a great jet. It's a great jet to fly. I wouldn't want to be flying that in combat because it's fairly limited in capability, but as a pilot, it's a spectacular airplane. It's just pure stick and rudder cables. Whatever you do in that airplane, and whatever the maneuvers you perform, it's 100% due to your skill or lack of skill, as it were. Let's see, anything else?
While we get the questions coming in, Paco, I just want to ask you, what did you ever go up against a T-45 at all? The Navy version Hawk?
I did not. So those came out in the training environment after I left. I was the T-34, T-2, TA-4. And I never really, I saw them. But with the regular fleet doesn't interact with the training command very much, so I didn't dogfight against them.
Brilliant.
Mike asked, what was your motivation to get through the tough times? There were never really tough times. Like I never got despondent. It was all fantastic and wonderful, and I relished every challenge. My motivation was that I loved what I was doing, and I wanted to get to the end. I really wanted to get the Navy wings, the wings of gold. And I wanted to get out there in the fleet and fly the cool jets, even though what we were flying, the T2s and A4s were fun. It's nothing like the F14 or the A6 at the time. And you're surrounded by your peers that are also very focused and dedicated, and it's a competitive group, but it's also a very supportive group. So everybody's kind of dragging each other along towards the eventual goal. It's a really excellent community. Richard asks, why does the Navy's Air Combat Command view the fast Eagle section attempt as a failure to maintain air superiority over its and a major concern for its air supremacy issue? Okay, so Richard asks, baby, why doesn't the Navy view the Tic Tac incident as a failure of air superiority? I think, Richard, to a certain degree, they do, which is why that initial ATIP or O&I investigation in 2015 was initiated. So at the time, in 2004, when Dave Fravor and the F-18s encountered the Tic Tac, and nobody really thought too much about it. It didn't really trigger any alarm bells at a very high level, but it percolated over time, and eventually somebody raised the question, like you are now, saying, well, if there's something out there that can fly, that can defeat all our radars, it can not be prosecuted by F-18s, which is our most sophisticated fighter at the time. What is it, and what is the threat? And that question is what prompted and motivated the investigation. So yeah, I think the Navy is interested. I don't know if they're concerned necessarily, but they're interested by what that is and how it affects a carrier strike group. All right, Ishigor, how did you choreograph the dogfight scenes shown in Speedin Angels? That is a good question because it took forever. So one of the things that I really wanted to do in Speedin Angels was make the viewer feel like they were in a dogfight, so a participant as opposed to just somebody that's passively watching it on screen. And so it took me a long time to kind of conceive of how to show the essence of what a dogfight is like without actually showing a real dogfight. So real dogfights, I think watching them is a little bit boring because they take it takes a little bit longer than you might think for the planes to come around and come back at each other. And while the pilots are involved in high G and high speed and all this kind of mental processing and manipulating the HOTAS to get the radar and the weapons properly, all of that is very internal. And so externally, you would just see two planes doing opposing turns and coming back at each other. So we choreographed a bunch of what I would call dogfight moves, planes passing each other, planes going up, planes rolling in behind each other. And we filmed a dogfight in segments from a variety of different angles, inside of the cockpit, outside the cockpit, from an airplane, airborne, from the ground, a mountaintop. And so we filmed these sequences and then overlaid them over audio, an existing and real audio, in a way that it made sense to the viewer and also conveyed the sense that they were in a dogfight. So I hope that answers your question. It's kind of a roundabout way, but it did take a long, long time to choreograph those sequences and shoot them from 3 or 4 different vantage points and then paste them all back together properly. Let's see. Mirrored window. F-35 is a love-hate. What role do you see it best suited for? I don't know why you would hate it. I think that it's the next generation of air combat. So as a pure fighter plane, it's not designed to be a pure fighter plane. It's not a standalone platform. It's not going to go out, single ship and meet an F-35 and, hand-to-hand combat, basically. That's not the role of the F-35. The F-35 is part of the new way that we treat air superiority. It's a connected battlefield. So there's this incredible Datalink system that receives information from satellites, from people on the ground, from ships, from B-52s, from all the F-35s and F-22s in the network, and eventually Hornets, Rhinos. And it builds this incredible battlefield picture. And then the F-35 can execute on that information, and it can quarterback other planes like F-15s and Super Hornets to go out and be missile shooters, and you can target something from a different airplanes, Datalink. So the way that air combat is going to be fought moving forward is completely different than the way that it's been done before. So it is a very capable platform. We just need to change, we meaning the general populace that loves airplanes, needs to change the way we view fighter planes. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mirrored Window, you're certainly welcome to follow up if you have something else that you want to know. Neil Osborne, what was your scariest carrier landing? Oh, that's a good one. I had a single engine landing in the A6 at night because I was flying. We were out doing what's called blue water ops, which is operations beyond any divert. So you have to come back to the ship or eject. Those are basically your two options. And I was flying, we're in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We don't really have any tasking. So a lot of times the ship will just send you out to check out all the surface contacts in the area and take pictures. And it's practice, and it's also good intelligence gathering for the carrier. So it's called SSC. And we were out doing SSC, my bombardier navigator and I, and as we're passing, we're maybe at 100 feet doing 400 some knots. And as we're passing this container ship, all of a sudden there's a massive banging coming out of my right engine, and I sort of don't know what it is, and my navigator, Mike Guard, goes, pull up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should pull up. And so I pull up and slow down, and it turns out my right engine had seized, and it was no longer working. And so I went back to the ship, and it's Indian Ocean, which is very hot, very humid. We were relatively heavy, so the ship had us dump down and then burn down even lower than we could dump. So we had enough gas for maybe 1 to 1.5 to 2 passes, period, single engine. Fortunately, it was a nice night. It was calm, but I was a nugget, so it was my first deployment. I had maybe 50 carrier landings, 60 total. And I'll just never forget, I was circling about 4 miles after the ship as the sun's going down and it's getting dark, and trying to burn that last little bit of gas down. And the captain of the ship came up and said, all right, that's enough. Come on and bring it aboard. And I was like, oh, okay. And it's kind of a weird thing knowing that, it's not just you and the airplane and the LSOs, like 5,000 people are watching you at this point because you're an emergency aircraft and there's a TV in every compartment. And obviously the landing was fine, but I mean, my heart was in my throat, and it was pretty scary. Mike Ryan asked, during your career, how did you find working with the British RAF RN crew and aircraft if you had this experience? I did not directly. I had, and I think I told this story last time, but I had this great mission over Kuwait when I was flying A6s. So later on in that deployment that I just talked about, the single engine landing, we were off the coast of Kuwait. This is 1992, so it's not too long after the 91 Gulf War, and we got this message that we're going to do a coordinated strike that was opposed. So it was going to be 2 A6s. I was leading a section of 2 A6s. There were going to be 2 Kuwaiti Hornets, F-14 Charlies, that were going to come and escort us to the target. There were going to be 2 Kuwaiti A4s, so the A4KU, which was a really cool A4 if you know anything about those, and they were going to go to the target but in a different way, and we were going to be opposed by British Tornadoes, however you pronounce that. And all of this was done via message, so there was no face-to-face briefs, there was no actual voice contact. It was just, be at this place, at this time, on this frequency, at this altitude, and everything will go swimmingly. So, I'm a young guy. It's my first cruise. I'm like, all right, sounds great. I'm in. So we show up. We're rendezvousing. All of a sudden, these 2 Hornets show up. I give the guys a thumbs up. And then I see the A4s show up as well. And the way it's supposed to work, Kuwait is a very small country. It's a city-state, essentially. The A6s and Hornets are going to go counterclockwise to a target. We're starting out over the ocean, and the target's on the west side of Kuwait, along the Iraqi border. And then the A4s are going to go the same way, and our TOTs are separated by, say, 3 to 4 minutes. So we'll be rolling in from the north, and we'll be off target and out of the air as the A4s are rolling in from the south. And that's the deconfliction, which in retrospect turned out not to be that great. So we start off, and again, I'm very young. This is my first experienced with anything like this. I'm super excited. We're, again, fast at 100 feet over the water. Then we make a left turn to west, and now we're flying at 100 feet over the desert. And I see some tornadoes over in the distance, and all of a sudden my 2 escort Hornets take off and they're gone, and I see them dogfighting over there, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're on our own. And we reach the target, and I do it's a low pop, so I'm coming in low, and my navigator and I and our wingman pop up to maybe 2,000 feet, and I'm in the dive, and I'm looking through my gun sight at the bombed out hangar that I'm supposed to be simulating diving, and all of a sudden an A4 zips right below me, maybe 200 feet below me, going in the opposite direction. One of the Kuwaiti A4s, he was early on his time on target, and I simulate dropping my bomb, and as I'm coming off, there's a tornado rolling in on me, and so I get involved in this big dogfight, and I'm trying to hold him off. We're like between 500 and 1,500 feet, just rolling and rolling, and as I'm in the middle of this, a Kuwaiti Hornet comes in and jumps the tornado, and I'm able to bug out, and my wingman and I are bugging out as fast as the A6 will go, so maybe 500 knots at 50 feet over Kuwait. He is perfectly in position with me, and we're flying out over the bay, and there's all these fishing boats just going zipping beneath us. It was awesome. So that was my experience working with the Royal Navy with the Brits. Marcel asks, have you flown the A4? If so, how would you compare it to the F5? I flew the TA4 when I was in training, and it was amazing. It was a great airplane, super maneuverable. Funny, it wasn't really designed to be a fighter, but it turned out to be a phenomenal adversary platform. My first job after I got winged was to go be a stash ensign. So I was waiting to go fly the A6, and I went to VFC 13 down in San Diego, and they had A4s. They had the Super Fox, which was an A4 with a 409 engine, and it was basically 1-to-1 thrust to weight ratio, and it couldn't go supersonic, but it could go. They would joke that it would go 0.9 in any direction, horizontally 0.9, straight down, straight up 0.9, and it was an amazing fighter. The F5 is a different type of fighter. Not nearly as maneuverable, certainly not as good in the slow speed environment as the A4, but really fast. I mean, we could get through the number in a second, and we could go 1.4 pretty easily, so we could chase some stuff down. Let's see. KLRGT500KR. Sorry, that's not easy to pronounce. What are your thoughts about the Navy working with Northrop Grumman on a true spiritual successor of the F-14 Tomcat, which will be a 6th generation air superiority dominance? I have no thoughts on that. I don't know anything about that. I don't think it's funny. Like, the people that love the Tomcat love it so much that they just can't let it go, and I appreciate that because I loved flying that airplane. But I don't know if you were here for the F-35 discussion, the way that combat is going to go in the future is it's going to be a connected battlefield. Obviously, the planes will be capable enough that if something happens, they can dogfight and do whatever they need to do. But it's not really about 1v1s anymore. It's more about how you control the airspace through a connected battlefield. I don't know that the F-14 will survive in any recognizable fashion moving forward, but it will in my heart forever. Let's see. John Ellis, if you had cash, would you buy a privately owned F5? I might, yeah. I mean, the fun of an airplane is flying it against someone. So I'd have to have cash enough to buy 2, John, so that I could go out and dogfight with some friends. Ishingor asks, considering that you were a senior pilot going into the Tomcat from the A6, how was it learning air-to-air tactics? It was definitely a learning curve. So I thought I knew what fighter pilots did when I was an A6 pilot because I really wanted to be a fighter pilot. But I was wrong, and it took me a while to, even though I was a senior guy, I was learning from some of the really junior guys, but I was really eager, and it took me a while to get up to speed, and it was humbling. I remember just getting my butt whooped in some of the dogfights and not understanding why, and it took a while to learn how to fly, the plane properly, and some of the easier stuff was, just using the radar, in the long-range BVR air-to-air combat stuff, because that's more, in a sense, clinical. It's more scripted. But the dogfighting it's really an art, married up with whatever science you have. You have to be able to really fly the plane well and understand what the other airplane is doing and the expectations of energy state and angles, lift vector, all that kind of stuff. So it took a while for that to really click into place. Marcel asks, some of those A4KU ended up flying for the Brazilian Navy, locally designated as the AF1. Oh, that's cool. I did not know that. Great airplanes. I wish I could have flown or could fly those. KLRGT 500 asks, did you ever fly the F-14B or D? If so, how did you compare it with the F-14A in terms of flying characteristics in air combat? I never flew the D, but I flew the F-14B about 6 or 7 times when I was going through the Tomcat RAG, and it was remarkable. My favorite story of flying the D was I was getting the D demo ride, and I was a relatively senior student going through the F-14 because I'd flown the A6 for a while. And the Rio that I was flying with, I'd known for a while, so there was a level of trust already. And he said, "All right, here's what I want you to do. We're out over the ocean off of Virginia Beach, about 100 miles offshore." And he said, and we own the surface to 50,000 feet or something like that, airspace. And he said, "I want you to get as low as you can and go about 400 knots, and then do 4G pull into the vertical and plug in the blowers and see what happens." And I'm like, okay, cool. So I get down, 100 feet or so, 400 knots, 4G pull, plug in the blowers, and I went straight up. And within, 30 seconds or so, I was at 45,000 feet, and I rolled over inverted and leveled out, and I was still doing 250 knots. It was an insane acceleration and climb. So the B with the big engine, the F-110s, was a different airplane from the F-14A, and I'm kind of bummed I didn't get to fly the B in the fleet, but whatever, these things worked out the way they did. Although the B, other than having an actual, like a better HUD and some of the other stuff, it was basically the same as the A. And then the D, I never flew. I didn't really have much involvement with, but I do know that the guys that flew it said the radar was incredible. It was a real game changer for them. Carl, where was your favorite place to go for cross countries? I was married when I was flying the F-14. I didn't do a lot of cross countries, and I lived in Southern California, which was kind of great place to be, period. I took some great cross countries out to Pensacola and Virginia Beach. Key West was always a good place to go. I don't know. It's funny that you asked that, because it's one of the things I remember most about taking cross countries was the Air Force bases that we stopped along the way to get gas in a burger, like Tinker Air Force Base. They had the Tinker Burger, and that was, it was always just a rite of passage to get a Tinker Burger on your gas and go. Mike Ryan, amazing account. Thanks so much for your insight. You're welcome, Mike. That's what I'm here for. AvGeek Joe, I noticed that you have a Black Lions patch. Did you fly with Toro? Hillary O'Connor mute. No, she was after me. So I was there from 93 to 96, and I believe that she came after I was gone. Mirrored Window, to simplify the hate on F-35 for me comes from it being the spiritual successor of the F-111B, trying to be too much at once. I mean, I can see that. So, you have a limited number of defense dollars that you could put to use. The F-22 is an amazing fighter plane, but it is an air superiority fighter. That's really all it does. And so we needed a platform to be able to penetrate enemy airspace, to open up all the to own the skies, basically. So you have to have it to be stealth. It has to be able to drop bombs, and it has to be connected. So I think the F-35 really is the best answer. It's not the best airplane that they could make, but it's the best answer to the problem that exists at this time. How do you get an airplane that's stealth, that's fast, that's connected, and that can deliver a fair amount of ordnance? Now, once we own the skies, then you can bring whatever you want, and you can bring B-52s or C-130s in to drop bombs. but you really do have to own the skies first. So I think the F-35 really does a good job at that. KLRGT 500, please give me like a nickname that's easier to say. Favorite strength with the F-14 in a fight against any adversary, which inspired the most confidence that you can win the fight. Vertical capability, high-low maneuvering, high G, turn fight. So the F-14, like easily the best asset that the F-14 had was, again, this was at the time, the AUG-9 radar, followed up by the, I think it was the APG-73 and the D. So the long-range radar, so a really big dish up front gives you long range. A big dish and a big power source gives you long range and the ability to discriminate targets at a long range. That coupled up with the AIM-54, even though we never actually used the AIM-54. I think the Iranians have a bunch of kills with that, but the U.S. Never did. But that is something that gave us a lot of confidence that we could, use that aircraft properly. Once we got into visual range, we were probably the underdog in that, certainly against a Slick Hornet or a F-35, I'm sorry, a Su-35, a Su-27 category of aircraft. But we flew a lot. I had, 250, 300-hour years, so I was very, very confident and competent in my airplane. And I felt like the quantity and quality of flying that I did, the training, the missiles, the readiness of my airplane, I felt like I was ready to meet any challenge that was out there. But on paper, the F-14 was a 6.5G airplane that was a 0.67, 0.7 thrust to weight. And it was, that's one of the reasons why it doesn't really exist anymore, because it was outclassed by the Su-27 and other threat aircraft that were coming. Neil, you're welcome. What aircraft would you want to fly that you never flown? Oh, Neil, it used to be the F-16. I had always wished I could fly the F-16, certainly as an adversary. Now I think it's the F-22. Man, that is an amazing air-to-air platform. That would have been incredible. Ishingor, what aircraft are you flying now as an airline pilot? 737, not the MAX, just a straight up 737, 78 and 900s. Which commercial aircraft would you like to fly in the future? For me, the airliners are just airliners. They are a means to an end. So I would like to fly internationally again, which I should be able to do sometime in the next year and a half to 2 years. So that would probably be the A330 or the 777, more likely the A330. Abgeek Joe, thanks. Big fan of you both, and thanks for being so available. My pleasure, for sure. Air crew interview. Mike asks, I always wanted to know why Navy crews always overlap their patches on the jacket. Because we love them so much that we can't get rid of them. I don't know. Navy guys in their jackets, we just love our patches. It's shameless. I'm sure it violates multiple regulations, but nobody ever really came after us, and it looks cool. I like it. All right, Carl, were you a patch collector while you were in? No, never. I mean, not in the sense that I deliberately went out and got patches. I clearly collected a few just because I was in a bunch of different squadrons. Paul Bassman, also, was there ever an F-14C? No, there was never an F-14C. Mirrored Window Paco, thanks for the response. As an A6 and fighter pilot, I value your outlook. You're welcome. LIK Liquid. I would have thought with the technology, the Phoenix missile, and how capable the F-14 radar was, that the likes of the Sukhoi wouldn't have been a threat. That's interesting. So they would not. You are absolutely right. And I would have never been concerned with going up in a no-kidding, beyond visual range war or engagement with any other aircraft, Sukhoi. But if the rules of engagement preclude a 200-mile Phoenix shot, then now you're starting to get into within visual range, and the Su-27 is a very capable maneuvering aircraft. So, it would have been an interesting fight. They had a better thrust to weight, they had better turn, and I had the confidence that I could fly the hell out of my airplane. So, would have been interesting. Joe D777, I've heard that the U.S. Navy is more flexible, variable in ACM training tactics, while the U.S. Air Force is more structured, rigid, and tends to repeat the same things over and over again. Any thoughts on this? I don't know. I don't know how the Air Force does their BFM training. I do know that they are really good. I've fought against them a number of times. BVR stuff, they are amazing. They are really, really good. But again, that's, as you mentioned and I mentioned earlier, that's very scripted. And it's, I'm not going to say it's easier, but you can, you kind of know what's coming and you know where your turn points are and your shot points are and stuff like that. But they are really good and very, very professional. Not that the Navy isn't, but I was always very impressed by the Air Force BVR work. Within visual range, I flew against some guys that were really good and some guys that were, not as good. I flew against them both in the Tomcat and the F5. Not a super lot of exposure to them, but they seem to be as good as Navy guys. The best, actually, some of the best guys I ever flew against were the Marine Corps fighter pilots, and they were really, really good. R Sharp, any comments on the 737 MAX from a pilot's perspective? I do. I mean, I feel like Boeing really let everybody down. I think the 737 has been around since, I think, the 60s. Not a ton of work has been done on it to improve it as an airplane, other than putting some new wings and engines on it and keep stretching it out. What they did with the MAX in terms of putting in a software safety that would prevent the airplane from stalling when it was in a bank is not unusual. Any of the big airplanes that are out there right now have those sort of laws that help prevent the planes from stalling or help prevent the pilots from exiting the safety envelopes. But it's the way that was done. It was done in the cheap, a single point of failure. Not the best engineers involved in designing the software itself. It's really disappointing to me. So the concept was not unusual, but it was the execution that was incredibly below par. And somebody should burn for that. That is really disappointing. KLRG T500KR. I have read the F-14 B and D with the GE F-110 engines with so much thrust in Zone 5, it would accelerate vertically. In your experience with the F-14A, could it accelerate vertically in full Zone 5 afterburner? No, it definitely could not. So the F-14A, I don't remember exactly what the thrust was, but it was roughly 0.7 thrust to weight. So, even if you were going incredibly fast and tried to, point yourself vertically and plug in the afterburners, gravity would be able to, eventually win the day. The fastest I ever went, though, was an F-14A. There's a profile, and I forget the name of it at this very moment, but it's named after a Russian Rotowski climb, I think, maybe something to that effect, where you climb at 0.9 until you get to a certain altitude, and then you bump the nose over and accelerate to 1.3, and then as you're accelerating, you start climbing, and that's as fast as you'll get. And I did that in a slick F-14A that had just come out of the rework facility. So it had no tanks and rails on it, and we were out off the coast of San Diego in the supersonic area, and my Rio and I were like, hey, let's see how fast we can get this thing going. And we got it to 1.7, which was pretty fast, and then I got dual compressor stalls, which is very classic TF30 garbage. Scared the hell out of both of us. But anyway, that's as fast as I ever went on an airplane. Marcel asks, can your Yak provide you the fix for the G and the thrill? If you move to the A330, you are welcome to Switzerland. Oh, well, thank you, Marcel. The Yak, I mean, it does a good job. It's not the same. There's more to flying in a fighter plane than just climbing into a fighter plane and going flying. You're part of this big mission. There's all kinds of people involved, both in the air and on the ground, and you really feel like you're part of something that's like a big game. You get the butterflies in your stomach, especially if you're launching from an aircraft carrier, because it really feels like a coordinated effort to get everybody airborne, and all the engines are starting at exactly the same time, and there's people scurrying around. So it really feels like you're part of something that's bigger than yourself, which is fun. And obviously, there's the thrill of going out and manipulating the machine through the briefed maneuvers to get yourself, into aerial combat and do all the missiles and stuff like that. The Yak is super fun to fly. It's challenging. I've got maybe a couple hundred hours in this tailwheel airplane now. It turns like crazy. It pulls 9Gs without even thinking about it. So it's really fun. It's fun to go out and dogfight, but it's just a little bit below, or maybe a lot below, that sort of big game feel that we used to get. Check your 677. Can you enjoy flying general aviation aerobatics after all Navy jets? I think that overlaps a little bit with the previous question. I do. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge of flying. I have access to a Bonanza as well, so I take my family flying in a Bonanza, and it's fun to go places. I like flying. It's not the same, and it never will be, but that's fine. Fighter pilots, like athletes, they die twice. Once when you finished with your young and thrilling career, and obviously the next time when you exit life. But it is still fun flying more normal airplanes. I do get a thrill out of it. You're welcome, Liquid. Let's see. Martin asks, how would you compare the F5 to its peers in turn performance-wise? So the F5, I can't remember the degrees per second. I wish I had it. I used to be obviously very familiar with that. But if you do a two-circle fight in an F5, you're going to lose. So a two-circle fight is, two airplanes, they cross their tails and they both turn in the same direction. So they're turning both of them in a left-hand or right-hand turn to try and see who comes nose on first. And it's how many degrees per second you can bring your nose about. The F5 is maybe 2/3 of the degrees per second of more modern fighters. So if all you do is turn in the horizontal as hard as you can, the other plane's going to come nose on first, get his radar lock, and shoot a missile at you. So you have to do something different. And you have to be aware of the other plane's capabilities and game plan, and you have to sort of force the fight into a way that's less advantageous to them. So one way to do that is to go one circle out of plane. So he goes horizontal and you go up and over, and that forces him to come up and meet you. And now the game is different, and you can think 3, 4, 5 steps, 5 merges ahead, and try to make that other plane do an error. So one of the things that was great about the F5, or is great about the F5 as an adversary platform, is that you should lose. You should lose every engagement based on performance characteristics, so that if you win, and we won a fair amount, when you win, that the blue plane did something wrong, and it's called a BFM error. And often it only takes one BFM error to lose a fight. So you can go back in the debrief and you can draw up the little squiggles on the board, and you say, I went left, you went right, I went up, you didn't counter me until it was too late, and by then I was able to get angles on you, and now you're defensive. And then you put a little red circle around that and say, this is where you made an error. Next time, learn from this moment and don't do that again. And you could really see a progression in the students as they were going through the syllabus, where they would learn from those moments to the point where you're losing every fight, which is what we're supposed to do in the F5. Mike says, do you have a website we can find more about yourself in your book? Thanks, Mike. Yes. lionsofthesky.com, lionsofthesky.com. It's got my bio, a bunch of interesting stuff, some video. I think I've got one of Mike's interviews up there as well. And my book is available. You can check it out, get some excerpts or whatever, and find out more about the book and Speedin Angels, the documentary. Thanks, Mike. Liquid says, comparing the A to the B, I guess not having to worry about the engines in the B model was a big concern off your mind whilst carrying out your sorties. I never really worried about the engines, Liquid. It becomes instinctive. Like, say if you've got a car that's a little bit longer than than your previous car, and you know that if you turn a little too tightly, you're going to rub the rear wheel against a curb or something like that. So after you drive it a few times, you don't do that anymore. It's sort of the same mentality when when we were flying the A. You knew that there were certain high angle of attacks with some side slip that would cause the inside engine to compressor stall. So you just, after a while, instinctively avoided those. The B guys, and I flew the B, like I said, about 5 to 7 times, so I never really got competent in it, and I didn't fly it in the fleet, but I talked to some guys in the bar, which is where pilots do their best talking, and he was describing to me, and there's one of my favorite maneuvers in dogfighting, period, in any airplane. It's called the pirouette, where you pass another airplane, and as you're passing him, you kind of pull nose up, and you're able to swap ends so that now you're chasing him instead of passing him in a neutral. It's a tricky maneuver because there's a lot of ways you can screw it up, and a lot of ways that if you do it wrong, that you actually give away any kind of advantage you would have. But I love doing it. In the F-14A, it was really cool because you would have to actually depart the airplane. So you would put the stick forward and to the right, and then as you're braking AOA, you would go full left aileron and right rudder, and the plane would just pivot like a frisbee and then start going down. The B guys could do that by splitting the engines, which blew my mind. So they would go up, and they could leave the left engine in full afterburner and pull the right engine back to military, which is full power without afterburner. And the plane would just swap ends and be right in the mix. And I loved hearing that story, the B and D guys. But I never was able to do that. Ishgor, how can we get that AVG Flying Tigers t-shirt? Oh, I don't know. I got it off the internet somewhere. It's a cool shirt, though. I love it. Neil says, as an airline pilot and used to use afterburners, would you love to fly a Concorde? Sure. Yeah. I mean, so flying fast with afterburners in and of itself is, I think it's something that you get used to very quickly, right? So if you're just not non-maneuvering, you take off, you accelerate, and if you're in a Concorde, you accelerate to Mach 2, and there you go. And the only thing you really notice is that the miles click away much more quickly. Other than that, it's not like you're pulling G's and really feeling the grunt, the push of the engines. SPQR 77, have you been back to Italy? I go to Italy every year. I'm there every year, every summer, at least. So, yes. KL RGT 500. Did you fight against the F-15? If so, which fighter were you flying, and what variant of it against which? So I did. I fought against the F-15, Charlies, and Strike Eagles when I was flying F-5s. And when I was fighting against the Charlies, it was all BVR stuff, so we were dead well before the merge, which was kind of a bummer. But against the Strike Eagles, we got to actually get engaged, and that was really fun. I can't make a generalization on communities based on a couple different engagements, but my experience was that the Strike Eagle guys weren't as good in the BFM arena, which makes sense because they were mostly air-to-ground pilots that did a little bit air-to-air, whereas the Charlie guys were pure air-to-air. But it was fun. It was super fun. It's always fun fighting a dissimilar aircraft. Tammy Marie Purdy. The Flight Museum in Everett, Washington, and Disney actually own the patent. Patent for what? I didn't spot that. Beetlejuice Fly. Flown any WW2 fighters in World War II? No, I have not. A good friend of mine who was actually the subject of Speedin Angels, Jay Consalvi, has done a bunch of Warbird flying. He's flown F4U Corsair. He's flown P-51. He flew a Yak-3 Soviet airplane, and maybe some other stuff. A T6. He owned or owns a T6. I've never done it other than my Yak, which is not really a Warbird. It was built in 1984, so it's relatively recently made airplane. I don't have any other tail dragger time. Liquid. Wow, to be honest, it sounds like it would be a lot more fun doing it in the A model. There's a lot more to the maneuver that way. That's awesome. Thank you. I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, it's nice to be able to, like, more is better. Like, I think it would be better to fly the F-22 than the F-14A, even though it was more difficult to fly the F-14A. It's a better airplane, and it allows you to offload some of those, like, stick and rudder things that you have to do, and allow you to conceptualize a better way to execute a dogfight, if that makes sense. When you're flying a less capable airplane, there's a certain portion of your brain power that is flying the airplane, and so that gives you less ability to be able to execute your weapon systems and tactics. So, what was the main difference between the F5 and the T-38? I never flew the T-38, but I know enough about it. So the F5 had bigger engines, has leading edge extensions, a shark nose in the front, a radar. Also, single seat was what we were, for the most part, 99% of the time we were single seat, versus T-38 is two seat. And we have leading edge slats and flaps that we use as maneuvering devices as we're dogfighting. So, and that makes a massive difference. So you could, as you're getting involved in a BFM engagement, you start turning and you pull out your leading edge slats and flaps to increase the camber of the wing and your degrees per second. It's a pretty big difference, actually. Beefier landing gear was designed. The F5 was designed to potentially work off of unimproved fields, so like dirt fields and stuff like that. The Flying Tiger logo. Sorry, Tammy. Didn't know what you were talking about. How much did you use reheat afterburner in the F5? Afterburner is used the same basically in every airplane. You use it when you need it. When you need to go fast, you plug it in, and then in your head you're counting the seconds, because like in the F-14 we have 20,000 pounds of gas, and afterburner burns 2,000 pounds per minute, so you could be gone and you could be empty in 10 minutes. So you're very cognizant of the amount of time that you were plugged into the blower. So dogfighting, and if you needed to get up to speed for an engagement, you would plug it in, but you're very conscious of the amount of time. And also when you're coming back in to go for the overhead, sometimes you get yourself up to 600 knots. Neil Osborne, thank you for your time in military service. You are welcome, Neil. It was my pleasure. Mick Pen 14, loved Speedin Angels. I noticed a couple of shots that you and Jay with you and Jay on a carrier. Had you transferred back to the fleet before filming was completed, and when you're making a cameo? Very observant. I was not in the fleet. I was a reservist, but I was going out to the carrier, and I asked if it was okay if I wore a flight suit, because that's what I was used to wearing on a carrier, and they were fine with it. So I showed up. I was a commander in the reserves at the time. I showed up in my flight suit and flight gear. Flight jacket, and I was kind of. It was in essence a cameo, because I wasn't supposed to be on camera, but Peyton Wilson, who was the director, just kind of got us talking and chatting in the wardroom, and it turned out to be a cool shot, and I'm glad it was in the movie. What was the fastest you had flown your F-14, and what was the highest altitude you went up to? So I covered this earlier. I went to 1.67, so I basically 1.7 in the F-14A before I had a dual compressor stall. And the highest I went was 45,000 feet in the F-14B in about 35 seconds, pure vertical. I'm sure it would have gone higher, but we were heading towards the top of our airspace, so we pulled over. Martin, as a fighter pilot, what do you consider the most essential characteristics needed for a good fighter? Those have changed over the years, those essential characteristics. We touched on it a little bit earlier in the F-35 discussion, but back in World War II, you needed something that could go pretty fast and shoot, and have a long range. And then maneuverability was critical, but not, essential. Like the ME-109 was more maneuverable than the P-51. It turned out the P-51 was a more successful fighter in the long range for a variety of reasons. Today, what makes a good fighter airplane? You need to have that connected battlefield, so that Datalink awareness. You have to have all these incredible sensors and sensor fusion, which is the ability to take all this data, the radar data, the infrared data, the camera, the actual camera data. I don't know if the F-35 has cameras embedded in its skin, and you take all of that stuff, the radar warning information, and you mush it into something that is usable for the air crew while he's going, 1.4 Mach and potentially being shot at. So that sensor fusion is really critical as well. There's an insane amount of information that fighter pilots are having to deal with now, and to be able to collect that data and then make it available to the pilot so that he or she can use it properly is really critical. And then obviously you need speed and you need stealth. You need the ability to deliver weapons. So there's a lot that goes into it. And the F-22 is a different beast than the F-35, and then the 6th generation fighters, I don't know what they're going to be, but it's probably pretty damn space age, just seeing what the F-35 can do already. Mike says we have 15 minutes left, so get your questions in. Ishigori, yeah, can I share something about my new book? I can. I don't know if you've read Lines of the Sky, but it's a naval aviation thriller, and it's got Slammer Richardson as the main character, who goes, he's an instructor, and he ends up with some of his students in this big battle in the South China Sea, the climactic battle scene. So the next book is called The Dragon, and it's a sequel. It continues Slammer Richardson's adventures. I think I'm going to share the prologue, because it's a pretty shocking prologue, pretty soon on my website. So go to that. I think there's going to be a way to sign up on that pretty soon to be able to get an excerpt from the book. But basically, it involves Iran. There's some F-14s in there. Slammer gets shot down, and everything that happens after that is fairly dramatic. So I hope that answers a little bit of your question. Beetlejuice, can you tell us one of your scariest moments in your flying career, if you had any, not the TF-30 style? That was a scary moment. Let's see, I had a plane crash, and I think I mentioned this last time. I crashed in an F5 in Reno landing, and I had a really big crosswind, and the synopsis is that the plane went off the end of the runway, rolled over, and the canopy broke, and the really thick plexiglass that the canopy is made of broke into these razor sharp shards, like daggers. And as the plane was upside down and sliding a little bit, the daggers bent back and cut my neck. I got a scar right here, but it cut my neck just deep enough to leave a scar, but not deep enough to cut my carotid or my trachea or anything like that. And I was hanging upside down with a shard in my neck, waiting to be rescued for quite a while. So that was probably my scariest. Ishigor asks, is there any chance that I might do a sequel of Speedin Angels? I've been asked over the years to, there have been some discussions about doing another TV show like Speedin Angels, but it's just never, I've had a bunch of meetings with a variety of different production companies. Nothing's ever really come of it. I'm happy to do it. I think the Navy would like that. It would be fun to do, but that's never come up. It's never been able to get past the meetings stage. Or re-release for a wider audience. Well, it's on the internet. I don't know how much wider you can get than the internet. Joe D777, do you happen to recall the G onset rate of the F5 and the F14? Well, the G onset rate was whatever you pulled. There was no metering to it. There's a stick, and if you snatched the stick back into your lap, the onset rate would be faster. And that's how most of our overstresses happened. Like you'd be coming to emerge doing 450, 500, 600 knots, and you'd either be surprised. Like my highest G ever was something like 11.9 Gs, and I was flying in a 2-seat F5 with our flight dock in the back seat, and we had finished up a huge furball engagement, and we're trying to bug out. So we're accelerating and going downhill, and I was going through about 500 knots, and the dock goes, brake right. There's a fighter at our right 2 o'clock, and I look and I see this guy coming right at us, and I turned into him and pulled, and I didn't think I pulled that hard, but I spiked the G up to basically 12 Gs. So that's the G onset rate as opposed to like an F-18 or the F-35, I think, and the F-22s have a measured onset rate where it won't allow them to over G the airplane. Ishigor, yes, I've read Lines of the Sky. I loved it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope you like the sequel as well. Tammy Marie, my great uncle JG, Bill Litter of the Grim Reaper Squadron, started dragging Red One. Okay. R Sharp. It's too bad they didn't have better cameras to film those last F-14s before they were retired. I agree. And we have some great HD footage of the F-14 in Speedin Angels. But we filmed, I think it was April of 2006 is when we filmed the air-to-air sequences and the ground-to-air sequences with the F-14 and the F-5s. And the plane was retired from service just a few months later in September. So we got the last of the good stuff. And I have like 200 hours maybe of HD F-14 footage sitting in my garage. I should probably do something with. I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks again, Paco. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well. Thank you all for listening and sending in great questions.